Hi, and welcome to today's webinar from NAATP. The session title is Where Do We Go From Here? Moving from Awareness to Action with DEI. We have three great speakers today, Zena Rodriguez, Dr. Danielle Jackman, and Dr. Annie Peters. Before I turn it over to them, I want to thank them for taking time to present with us today and also for developing this really important tool. I think it's important for our field and also throughout industry nationally, and we're really excited to be offering this from the National Association. This is part of an ongoing webinar series hosted by NAATP. We had 3 this month, all focused on staffing. Those can be viewed on demand from our website. We also have a webinar scheduled for April with the title Building Organizational Sustainability Through Braided Strategies, and you can register for that also on our website. I have a few logistical pieces to go over. This session is being recorded today. We'll send a follow-up email to all attendees next week that has a link to the recording, a PDF of the slides, and confirmation of continuing education credits through NAATP. As you have questions come up, please type those into the question and answer panel at the bottom of the screen. We will be saving questions for the end of the session, but make sure you type those in early when they come up so that you remember them at the end and we can address as many questions as possible. With that, I again want to thank Zena, Danielle, and Annie for presenting with us today. This is really important. And Annie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. I'm Annie Peters from NAATP, and I'm really excited for this webinar and to be here with Zena and Danielle. On the first slide, I can just go to the first slide there. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. The next, yep. So I'm going to just speak briefly a few minutes here about why NAATP believes that this tool, this model was important for providers. And then I'm going to turn it over to Zena, who's really going to take a deep dive into the tool and the model itself and go through the pieces of the tool that we have available. And then Danielle is going to talk about some important things to consider as providers walk through this journey of improving diversity and inclusion in their leadership and their staff, and equity, improving equity, racial equity, and other forms of equity in access to treatment services and recovery support services. And then towards the end, we'll talk about how we've created an online portal for you all we're going to invite you to submit your scores to NAATP from your leadership, who will be able to individually and anonymously submit their scores for your organization, and we'll aggregate those and send a report back to you that will be a confidential report, and we'll even be inviting some of you to be involved in a panel discussion at NAATP National conference in May. So we're really excited about this. And so my piece here at the beginning is I just wanted to say a few words about why this topic and why this tool is important to NAATP. So if you could advance to the next slide, actually the one after that, I just want to show the committee. We created this committee. It's called at this point, the DEI committee for NAATP, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also talk a lot about belonging, social justice. And this committee is just an incredible group of people who work in the field. There's researchers, leaders, a lot of clinicians, frontline staff, leadership, and consultants as well. And this group of people has been meeting regularly. We had a lot of meetings last year and just had some incredible keep a list of quotes that people on this committee make, and I just wanted to share a few of them because this is really what led us to realize that we needed something to help treatment providers move forward with respect to these issues. One quote was, "Addiction and its treatment are so stigmatized and so heavily impacted by oppressive and racist public policies that were founded in the war on drugs. And much of addiction treatment itself was developed by white, cisgender, straight men. And there's no blame in that statement intended, but it's the reality in which we work. We need to know how we're impacting people with our services and our workplaces. Our patients are suffering more than ever, and our staff are working harder and struggling more than ever. We need to know how to nurture, support, and include them all, foster a sense of belonging, a sense of shared purpose and passion, and fight this illness that's only getting worse. And we need a starting point. If we want to improve the equity and who gets access to services, and we want to improve the inclusivity, the feelings of inclusivity within our organizations, we need a starting point. And so before we can even start with where do we go from here, we have to look at where we are now. So the committee said, let's look at some options that are available for assessment of readiness to change. And so you can go to the previous slide, and we just listed some of them. We looked at, I don't know, probably 100 different types of surveys and measures around racial equity and inclusivity and climate of equity. And we realized that there wasn't anything about specifically related to addiction treatment. So, even things like whether or not we include in our patient satisfaction surveys questions like, I felt my providers were affirming of and competent related to my identity and culture. That wasn't really reflected in some of these. Or for example, I feel that racial and cultural factors contribute to my relapse or to my sobriety or my recovery. Those kinds of thinking about those things weren't really included in these because we wanted something that was specific to recovery organizations. So we thought through all of these tools and decided, if you think about how we assess a patient clinically. We start with an assessment, and then that helps us determine a course of treatment. We wanted to use a similar model. I think it was Zena who said, we're all familiar with the stages of change. The movement of change of an organization is so similar to the stages of change model that why don't we use that model to really think about making steps forward. And so that's what we did. We looked at the stages of change model and created this tool that then we hope is used for people to self-assess within their organizations. It's a leadership focused tool. And then to say, well, how do we create kind of a treatment plan or an implementation plan to move forward? And the stages of change model is so inclusive and supportive and non-judgmental that we thought this was a really good place for us all to look at because we're familiar with this model and this tool. So that's what we've done. So we wanted to do a quick exercise with you all before we start into the meat of the tool. So this is something, if you haven't tried Mentimeter before, it's kind of a fun tool, but we wanted you to think about kind of how you're feeling as we go into this discussion. And so if you can grab your cell phone, if you have your cell phone, you can go to menti.com, menti.com and enter that code, or you can turn on your camera and scan the QR code. And so we're going to put that in the chat as well. And so this is for everybody who's on right now. If you can grab your phone and log into this, it just takes a minute. You don't have to give a login or a password or anything. You're just able to do it right away. And then if you can go to the next slide, we'll keep that code in the slide or in the chat. We just want you to think about what are the 3 words that best describe how you're feeling as we talk about things like racial equity and addiction treatment and improving inclusivity within our staff and belonging in our staff that's more and more diverse. So just if you can go to that menti.com and enter some words that describe how you're feeling, we'll do a kind of neat little exercise here. Okay. Just wait for a couple seconds here for people to Great. So the bigger words are things that more people are entering. So excited, curious, and hopeful. So that's wonderful to hear. We also see things like nervous and scared and anxious, mindful, stressed, and challenged. And these are all the kinds of things that we're hoping to evoke, is for people to have a sense of interest around this and awareness. I see systemic barriers, apprehensive, concerned about backlash, hungry. This is really great. So thank you all for participating in this. This really gives us a sense about where everybody is as we begin this process. So I'm going to go ahead. Oh, imposter. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Some really honest responses here. So I'm going to turn this over to Zena and let her jump into the tool itself, and then Danielle to talk about its use. So we really appreciate your being here and excited to continue this conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. And goodness, thank you so much for those responses. I mean, that is such a huge part of, I think, even as a member of the DEI NAATP committee, so many of those feelings, I think if we all think about our experience, we all felt that at some point in the journey or continue to feel it in different ways. And what I love about the process of this and what I love to impart on organizations is to normalize this. This is really new for our field. And this is an interesting time for us to approach it in an important time. And as for those of you who were able to participate in our national conference in December, we made this a real highlight of what we needed to discuss. We know as a field, we've really been lacking in this area. We know as a private for-profit field from industry, for many of our members here, there is one dominant culture that's represented in our treatment settings, either as patients or as leadership. So for us, it was a real recognition of that. And then the secondary recognition, or it's not secondary, it just is primary, but part of this was there's a lot of people out there who are unrepresented from other communities, other marginalized, systemic reasons and other reasons, cultural reasons, stigma, that don't receive access to treatment. And our goal was, as a committee, to really just start the conversation of awareness. So as I go through this, some of what I was thinking about when I was prepping this morning was, as a committee, we kind of went through this in some ways, and we're still in certain phases. And I think as an organization, NAATP is as well. So we are as representative of what you all are feeling and where you are in the process as needs to be. And hopefully this tool helps elicit conversation within your organization, helps you think about it more, helps you think about what resources you need to support some of that. That one topic comes up often, concern about backlash. That's real. That's a real concern. How do you address that? How do you engage with external stakeholders? So I'll walk you through the process. The image you're seeing right now in these next couple of slides are just the PDF version of what it looks like when you log on. And I think also in the portal as well, it's laid out this way. So it gives you just an overview. It's broken down into 9 categories. And the crux of it is the organizational stages of change model, right? And not just the organizational, but we're thinking about ourselves as a patient, right? If you're an organization, think of putting that lens, the stages of change model of addiction treatment, as the patient. We are the patient right now. And so when I think of that, I don't just think about the prescriptive things that we need to do and the check off the box compliance things. I also think about the vein of the healing. And as I work personally with leaders, it's an area where I feel a lot of introspection needs to come into, right? This is a lot of healing work. This is not just a linear change process. There is going to be fluidity, so when we think of pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance, you can be bouncing out of some of those at different times, or you could be on multiple stages at different times. So it's acknowledging and recognizing that. And then from how we really applied it to addiction treatment was really thinking about the components of provider care. So thinking about an organization and the commitment an organization would have to DEI. So that's one of the categories. You will see policies and procedures, because we're all driven in how we actualize our programming, our operations by policies and procedures. So how is that informed? How are we being inclusive in those areas? We think about training, all of, especially provider organizations, we provide lots of trainings. Where are our trainings? What are we currently doing that are just compulsory, and what needs to be improved upon that is really specific to treating populations that we normally haven't recognized in our settings? And from the clinical care component, so there are other categories, clinical care, I often think about, and we hear it from various community members of our committee members, is also respecting that our lens to clinical care is really based on modalities that were not researched with other marginalized communities. The body of most of our work, I'm a social worker, as I was trained, the body of research that we used and who we studied was really white patriarchal information we were given, knowledge we were given, and who the research folks were for our evidence-based care were one specific community. So we're recognizing that we need to expand that. So, and clinical care also includes our environment. Is our environment receptive to other clients and other folks from different identities and different communities? So being really, that was a big topic that came up when our DEI committee has been meeting and continues to meet. It's something we discuss. And then the other category, I think just as important, is the community. The community is our main stakeholder. They're not, we don't want to think of them just as an external stakeholder. These are folks that we want to engage in treatment with us, or we want them to be our employees. So we broke these categories in that vein, and then we have diversity, equity, inclusivity categories as well. Danielle, we can advance to the stages of organizational model. So those 3 slides right there that Danielle is advancing are just kind of the image of the tool in its PDF format. And as I alluded to, this is how the organizational model of stages of change. And so if we look at the main components of it, it's creating that awareness, it's developing knowledge, it's changing attitudes and perceptions, and developing norms around that. And that developing norms is really about culture shift. And we'll talk about that as we go along. And along with that is behavior. So if we look at this, it's this real linear line. This work is not linear. This work, and everyone is on a different phase of this work. And I wish that that little arrow between attitudes, perceptions, and norms actually connected, that arrow was going through all of the key areas identified, because I think this should be a fluid area. This topic is fluid, it's ever changing. We receive new information. And what we want to be able to do as professionals is be aware of them, get the knowledge that we need so we can change attitudes, perceptions, and norms, and do it at the continuum of from an organizational level that we need to. Okay, we can advance. So we hit this early stage. This is where we're at, right? I really believe anecdotally, and others may agree or have some difference of opinion. I'd love for you to dialogue about it when we have time during our Q&A session, that as a field, we're really in this pre-contemplation mode. And this is the goals if you're in pre-contemplation, the traditional stages of model of change, right? We want to raise doubt and concern about our current belief and practices, increase the perception of problems with the current state, and practice harm reduction strategies, right? We know that unintentionally, and this is really, and I love that Annie said this, we want to take the guilt out of this, and someone expressed that, or a few people expressed that. Please, 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 as you're looking at this and as we're discussing it today, remove the guilt piece, and it's just like that acceptance, right? This is an acceptance of where we are. And what we want to be able to do is raise some concerns that are out there. Are there biases that we're not aware of within our institutions? Is there a lack of awareness of what might be going on with our clients and staff? I think sometimes in leadership settings, we are a little bit tunnel vision. We don't know what's going on down in the other layers of the weeds, but but it's happening whether we recognize it or not. So this pre-contemplation stage is really kind of like, is there a possibility that there's stuff that we're not aware of that we need to be aware of? Are we taking a colorblind approach? And I hear that often. Folks so well-intentioned, it's so embedded in the water of our society. And I think it comes from, vestiges of patriarchal Christianity, that we're all God's children, and we are, but it's recognizing the societal differences around race and identity that are active and living right now, and really taking an approach that we consider what that impact is of saying we're colorblind with other communities. So this is a time to really kind of, this pre-contemplation is that thinking about it, and thinking about it in the vein of harm reduction, because that's what we really ultimately want to do. We want to create spaces where we're not continuing to harm folks based on how they may identify, right? And we may be unaware in our settings, and this often happens, and we're seeing it play out right now with the testimony with our future Supreme Court nominee, but the overt and covert racism that exists in organizations. Folks sometimes don't realize it, and folks sometimes do realize it, right? So it's being able to begin this pre-contemplation process of bringing awareness to this. So you can go to the next slide. And this slide and is just kind of like, then how is that broken down for an organization? And I won't get into the details of it, but this is kind of like, in each of those categories, what are the things you need to be looking at? And we can go to contemplation. So again, I think we are kind of more on the pre-contemplation side as a field, but I also think there's some areas of contemplation where we are, right? I think we are starting to recognize that we have positioned ourselves in a position of privilege as treatment providers, that certain folks get treatment and certain folks don't, and that we recognize that there are communities out there that are deserving. So this contemplation, we're learning this. And what we're starting to do is this goal, what we want to do is explore the ambivalence to change, to identify reasons for change and the risk of not changing, and to increase our confidence. All of us, this is a scary, this is not easy. It's normalizing this, and that was expressed in that opening question. How do we increase our confidence and ability to change? As our awareness grows, how do we address the guilt and shame through healing practices? And this is so important for leaders, because this is interpersonal. Leadership work is interpersonal work as well. And good leaders are taking a good inventory of why they're doing this work or why they're not doing this work. If their organization or other members are starting to bring it to recognition, this is the time for leaders to really take an introspective why on that. And, part of my work with organizations as a consultant is really to slow down the process of wanting to just jump into DEI work, and really for leaders to become introspective about why they're doing the work, who needs to be at the table for this work, what steps need to happen along this work, what individual work may a leader need to have to embark on, so that we're doing this without the guilt and shame, and we're creating an environment of healing, just as we would for a client. So I love to say that over and over again, because when we're feeling overwhelmed about this topic, just bring it back to the services we provide and how we deliver it to the client. Clients come in, they're scared, they're overwhelmed, they don't know what to do, but we take one step at a time with them. And so as leadership, I think that is the biggest piece. And for those of you who were able to participate in Resma Menachem's presentation at the national conference, one of the things he said, and it really hit home for me, because as a consultant in this work and my passion for it, I have an urgency to it. Like, I want to impact change. I'm a social worker. This is my mandate. This is what I was born to do. This is what I want to do. But with this work, we have to slow it down. And we should slow it down. So taking this initial assessment, and the overall goal is that we're doing that. We're asking organizations to just assess first, take a step back, use this tool to assess, and then see where the incremental changes you can make. We're not changing, the societal issues overnight. This is generational stuff that we're working on, and it's going to take generations to work on it. But we're starting the process, right? We're in this pre-contemplation. So we want to get into the preparation mode. We can advance that slide. So our goals here for preparation. So we want to set goals and develop a realistic plan to take steps towards change. As awareness continues to grow, we continue healing practices and sublimate guilt and shame into energy for action and growth. So for me, like that, those first phases when I'm working with clients, when I'm thinking of the pre-contemplation and contemplation, that's really the inviting. And I use the analogy of dinner. Like that beginning piece is we're having a dinner party with some folks that we haven't had a lot of relationship with. They're newer to us. We don't know them that well, but we really want to have a nice environment set up. We want to have nice food served, but we want to get curious about what their needs are. So the best way to be curious is to ask them, right? Like, what are your needs? And so a lot of this preparation stage is really thinking about what are the needs of the communities that we're inviting in, or that we know we need to invite in, right? And what realistic, intentional steps can we take so that we can create best practices, sublimate the guilt and the shame, as it says here in this goal, with action and growth. And in the process, we're healing. That's why the urgency piece, the slowing it down piece, it's so important, because in this phase, this preparation phase is where we want to get intentional. We can advance. And so hopefully, as we're doing this, and I look at where we are with the DEI committee and with NAATP, we've kind of been in all three of these areas. I think we've taken it on. We went from pre-contemplation, contemplation. We're still in contemplation around some items, but we've taken action on a few items. And one of those was really to amplify voices. So of people of color within our field who normally did not have a voice. So we spent last year launching the podcast Colors of Recovery, and it gave real insight and real depth to members of our own professional community, to kind of the barriers that they have seen from their own lived experiences, and outlining some action steps that we needed to be aware of. And I think that was a powerful action item that we took on. So back to the point of, you can be in action and contemplation at the same time. And that's probably going to be consistent throughout the process. And we hope that that's what's happening. And so in the action stage, your goals are, you're making changes and you want to monitor progress, right? So for my leadership folks out here, how do we monitor progress? We set up some KPIs, right? That's how we internally monitor progress as organizations. What are our key performance indicators? So here we're really starting to integrate DEI as part of our overall organizational plan. How do we incorporate that? And when we incorporate any initiative within our organizational plan, we are really kind of putting out, what it is, what our goal is, how are we going to measure that goal, who's going to be responsible for that goal, and how do we get it moving? So this is what we do in that process. And as it says here, as the awareness continues to develop, continue healing practices and use recognition and ongoing disparities for the energy to act, grow, and advocate for change for others. So again, we are constantly iterating. The reason this is not a static action that we're taking on. We know that this is going to evolve and iterate as it needs to, as it is informed by the stakeholders that need to be guiding the process. We can advance. Okay, so now maintenance. Well, this I think will have a long way to go before we're all in maintenance stage, but this is the most aspirational part of the stage, right? We want to have sustainable long-term recovery in DEI work for our field. So the goal is to continuously pursue personal and professional agility and improvement as best practices in DEI change over time, continue healing practices and help others through their process of change. So I think this is the most aspirational goal. I think the only way to look at this goal is to know you will be on it for a very, very long time of the continuum, and should be. And when I'm working with clients, and I've had some early missteps, I've gone in with the urgency and to meet the urgency that they've wanted. And when we do this, what we end up doing is just being compulsory and checking off boxes. And we're not really working towards the overall goal is to create an environment where everyone feels they belong, right? That staff and clients feel that they belong. If we're doing this as check the box activities, it's going to become performative. It's going to become performative to your staff, and it'll be performative to your external stakeholders and your consumers. People will see through it. So I love to work with organizations who really take this on the seriousness of the slow down. Let's think about this. Let's get interpersonal. Let's think about why we're doing it. And let's chart a course that can be beneficial to everyone in the process. So with that, I think this is a good segue to Danielle, because she's going to outline some of the ways that you can be supported throughout this and what you need to be aware of.
Thank you, Zena. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Do you want to do this, or I can do it?
Oh, you can do it.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much for that really powerful explanation of the assessment and why we're doing this work. I see people already starting to engage in this and just trying to think about overall, where do you believe your organization is in that stages of change? Just give a few minutes for people to complete it. I see things popping up where people are feeling very strongly. A lot of people are feeling very strongly that they're in the contemplation stage as an agency. But there are those that feel also strong that they're in the action step. So that's really impressive and good to know. Okay, well, thank you so much for participating in this. One thing that I'm hoping is that at the end of Zena's presentation section, that the feelings of curiosity and excitement have grown larger, with the recognition that other feelings are growing just as large, feelings of imposter, maybe feelings of fear, or intimidation, or feelings of anxiety may also be growing. Note that the DEI Exec Committee, NAATP, we're here for you. We're here to walk alongside you and really make you feel like this is a process you can address and handle with grace, and give that space for grace, because we know that getting into the weeds of this is going to be, it can bring up a lot of different things. And so we're here for you every step of the way. And we thought it was really important for us to end this webinar by talking about two things to consider. Of course, there are much more that you can consider, but two very key things to consider when moving through this process and this journey of discovery, right? The first is something that Zena sort of mentioned, and I'm going to echo, and it's that using the mirrors, windows, then doors approach to this work. And really, you can apply this to other spaces too, but really important to take the time to pause and maybe literally or figuratively look in the mirror, starting off by looking in the mirror and doing some reflection work, some individual reflection work, then organization. And so what that would look like is thinking through, what are the things that you need, you as an individual need to get your diversity voice be heard, to have your say, to feel like you belong, to feel like you're included in the process, to feel like your treatment of needs and resources are being fair. And then think about, as you engage in the assessment work and you look at the different characteristics listed there, why do you think that those characteristics are in need of addressing from a DEI lens? If no, then ask yourself why. If yes, then ask yourself, how have you been addressing them, you as an individual? Then look at the organization. Does the organization believe that these characteristics are in need of addressing from DEI lens? If the answer is no, then ask why. If the answer is yes, then ask how have they, right? Why am I asking you to think about individual and organization? Well, Zena put it nicely by thinking about yourself as a client, and you're not just a client thinking about yourself as a client that you're serving, you're also being served by the organization. The individuals make up the organization. And so if individuals don't believe that these are things worthy of addressing, worthy of assessing, then the advocacy of it to change would be much more minimized or muted. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about these as individuals and thinking about them from an organization standpoint. And finally, as you're doing reflection work, think about the organization's values. Now, there's values that are printed in websites and marketed, and then there's a value behind the value, which is what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what clients feel and see. It's the culture, right? So are the values being represented in alignment with moving in a space of diversity, equity, and inclusion within your organization? And if not, why? Right? So doing some self-reflection work can then help you to look out the window and look out the window, looking into other organizations and what they're doing. Organizations within your industry and organizations external to your industry can be really helpful to get a sense of where people are moving and how people are moving. So take a look at the organization, do a lot of reviewing of different organizations, research of different organizations, and find out what are some of their successes, what are some of their barriers that they've had to address, what are some of their pain points that they've had to address. It could be in your own local state, it could be national, it could be international. And then what are some gaps that are still existing? Those gaps are really important because you can help fill those gaps. You can help contribute to what they're doing as well, right? And so when you're looking out the window and doing reviews, you might see, aha, that's my aha moment of this is how I can take the organization to another level and address some of those gaps or add to the conversation that's already happening. And that is your way of opening the doors to opportunity, reforming and transforming your space into places that it has not yet explored, or advancing what you're already doing into that maintenance that even elevates already the justice work, the equity, diversity, and inclusion work that you're doing in that space. So that involves being inviting change makers and leaders that are from all different levels of your organization, not just those that sit in the C-suite, but all throughout the organization, even leaders that are outside in the community that are being served by your organization, because you serve them and they serve you. So inviting all of them to the table and opening doors of opportunity for transformation and reforming the structure and the integral part of your organization. Now, when you're opening doors for opportunity, you might have to go back to that mirror and look out the window again, but at least you're taking the time to do that self-reflection work prior to, because as humans, most of us are really solution focused and really eager to jump in. But if we jump in without truly assessing the why of the problem, then we might be cutting ourselves short in terms of really coming up with a comprehensive solution. So the second thing to consider when embarking on this journey is your ability to leverage power. Now, as you look at this wheel, you might be starting to map out where you think power is. And let me just preface this by saying this is not a comprehensive list of all the identities that there may be. And this wheel of identity really represents identities that are most tangible for getting closer to and further from inherent levels of power on the Western slope. But there's lots of other identities that are not listed here. And some of these identities listed here may not be as applicable to moving in that wheel of power when it comes to other countries or continents. There is a great author and change maker called John Maxwell, and he said in one of his books, of his many books, the mark of a true leader is the ability to influence, nothing more, nothing less. And I resonate with that quote. And I also feel that the mark of a true leader is the ability to influence and leverage their power. So as you're looking at this wheel of identities and where you may be mapping yourself, are you closer to that center power, or more of your identities are further away? I want you to really be mindful of taking the time to leverage your power. And so what does it look like? If most of your identities listed here are in that inner circle of power, then when you embark on this journey with your organization and with your community or communities, if you serve more than one, I want you to think about your leadership here in this space and how you can leverage your power to invite others who may not be as close to that centric circle in, so that you can have great work and produce great work. If you find yourself mapping your identities closer to the outer skirts of that wheel of power, no fear. I want you to use your leadership skills to influence others who are in that closer circle to leverage their power and invite you in. And not just invite you in, but have a seat at the table, and not just have a seat at the table, but have your voice be heard and respected and valued for the contribution that it's giving, not tokenizing, but really giving you that power to say, I honor you and I honor your voice. So those are the two major considerations that we think we'd really want you to embark on when it comes to working through the assessment, and not just completing the assessment, but then the next steps beyond the assessment, what's next, basically. So Annie, I will pass it on to you to wrap it up.
Thank you both so much for this overview. And we want to put two links in the chat. I put in there the link to the tool online. There are two other things that may be helpful. One is a blog. And let me put the blog first. We wrote a blog that describes, I was really glad the National Council for Mental Wellbeing reviewed our tool and gave us some questions to think about, things like, well, what's the purpose of this tool? How did you create it? How can an organization use it? Once the assessment is done, how can results be used to implement change? And so that blog is useful in that process. And then the other one, speaking to how, since Danielle just mentioned two things to think about on this journey, one being looking into other organizations and their successes and pain points, and then leveraging your power as a leader to inspire change. Both of those can be, points can be addressed by perhaps participating with NAATP in this assessment. So what we did was, we created so obviously the tool is online, but we also created an online portal where you can share your organization's results. So actually, if you send out the link, which I'm going to put in the chat right now, to the online survey, then you can guide any leader in your organization. We do recommend that it's leaders that complete this, just because when you get into the tool and you start reading about, DEI metrics and things like that, all staff in your organization may not know if you do those things or not. And so this really is for anyone from maybe a team leader position up through manager, director, C-level executive staff, to even your board to look at this if they may not be aware of some of the particulars either, but to have all leaders in your organization to look at the tool and then enter their ratings for how they perceive the organization's readiness to change with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So this tool doesn't ask for your name, it asks for your organization only. So it is anonymous as far as who completes it. We'll just know the level of the organization that you work in and your organization. And what we will do at NAATP is tally your results as an organization and give you back a confidential report.
I think that Annie is frozen. We'll give her a second to come back on and finish what she was saying. In the meantime, there's one question that I'd use to interject from Ginny Mills. Is there any way to know what organizations participate so that we can know who we can connect with? Do we have to be members to access the online portal? I'll start with the last piece. The tool is being released to anybody who wants to use it. I think that it's been tailored specifically to the addiction treatment field, and I'll let Danielle and Zena talk a little bit more about that piece, but I think it has applicability anywhere, and you do not have to be a member to access this toolkit. I think that it's really intended to help the field as a whole, not just NAATP members. I wish that Annie were on here for the first part about connecting different organizations that are working through this process, but I think, again, Danielle and Zena, you may have some input on that.
Yeah, I know there's the confidentiality piece that we really wanted to respect with organizations, but I don't want to speak out of turn for Annie, but I'm imagining that if folks reached out to her, she would be able to have a discussion and maybe align people appropriately. And then I think while we wait for Annie, one thing that struck me, because I'm really sitting with the folks that say they're overwhelmed, because it's an overwhelming process. It is. I think what I would like to offer is that as you do this as a leadership group, even if you sit with them, a few of or you hand this over to a couple of identified leadership members, and you need support with it, there are resources for you. And I think you sometimes need objectivity too for your organization, and working with outside folks would help support that process. So I definitely encourage folks to just go ahead and dive in and take the assessment, figure out, where you are, so you know what your needs are, just like a treatment plan, like, or biopsychosocial assessment, I should say, what are the needs, where are your strengths right now, and what are the opportunities that you may need some assistance with. And I'll say this, really transparently, what I've seen with organizations is sometimes they over rely on folks that are representative of certain communities that are already have a role within an organization. And this is an additional task that's put on them as part of committees, or as part of just their eagerness to want to support the organization and impactful change. But I would definitely suggest organizations and leaders be thoughtful about that process. I don't know if Danielle, if you can add anything around that.
Yeah, well, thank you. To answer your question, just reiterate the second part of the question, you do not need to be NAATP. I have taken it before, and you will just have to enter your organization separately. If you are part of NAATP, though, you will see the list. To respond to Zena, I echo what you share, Zena, and I think that it will be really helpful if you have, if there are a lot of people in the space of leadership that are having a lot of nervousness about engaging in this process, don't put it off, right? Don't silence it and say, we'll put it on this virtual shelf and never get to it. Take the time to hire someone external facilitator that can come and help ease you into the process and offer a space of grace. It does not mean that it will be comfortable, right? But that's not the intention either. What it means is that you'll feel probably more confident engaging with the discomfort. So recognize that, and echoing again what Zena said about just being very intentional about who you're inviting. Remember your leadership and the duties and responsibilities you have as a leader to leverage your power no matter where you are. So I'll just end there.
I think there's just some Wi-Fi issues from Annie, so we can answer questions now at this time.
Yeah, if folks have questions, please type those into the question and answer panel, and I'll read those out and ask them to Zena and Danielle. I'd add one last piece, kind of touching in with Jeannie's question, and say that there's going to be a part 2 of this session at the NAATP National Conference in May in San Diego. And we'll be inviting some of our members or organizations that have engaged in this process to have them share their experience. And I think that could be another valuable time to engage with leaders who are going through this process, hear their experience, and collaborate on ways to engage in the process. So I'd encourage folks, if you're able to attend that conference and that session specifically, it could be a good way to connect with others.
If I'm not mistaken, the session will be on that Monday at 9:30.
I'm not seeing many other questions come in. There's a question about the recording. Yes, we are recording the session. We'll send an email next week that has a link to the recording, the session slides, the toolkit, some of the other resources that have been mentioned here. While we're waiting for some other questions to come in, I'd be interested. I've heard from talking with people, there can be some embedded resistance, whether it's fear or misunderstanding, to engaging in this process in leadership. And are there some strategies that either of you have to working through that resistance from organizational leadership to start engaging in the process and looking at these issues?
Danielle, you want to take that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Annie, should we wrap up with Annie or just answer the question first?
If you have an answer to the question, let's do that, and then we can jump back to where Annie dropped off.
Okay, sure. So yes, you're right. There can be a lot of resistance, and I think it comes from legit, concerns that if we rock the boat too much, then how would that impact funding? How would that impact our client base? And so there is sometimes a tendency to not want to address the issue, or not address the issue fully, right? Then there can be the thought of, well, we're trying to overcorrect, so that then they go into solutions without doing a lot of reviewing and reflecting on what the issue really is. And so both of those things happen, and it can happen simultaneously. My answer to how to start to quell some of those nervousness and fears is to just take the time, once again, to do some self-reflection work and pausing. That would really help you to really level the playing field and say, what is it that's really happening here, and how can I be of use and of value to address the situation? Then, if you still have a lot of reservations, or your organization have a lot of reservations, have someone external and more objective come to the table and say, what is it that's related to the fears? Why are the fears happening? Because that can also help to elevate the space. I think when you engage in this assessment, it's really helpful to take the time to read through the different categories. I know that there is a lot of information, and that can itself feel overwhelming, but it's really important that we took the time to break it down so that you can kind of glean every step of the way, from pre-contemplation to maintenance, what that looks like for the different categories. So take the time to read it, and you'd realize, okay, maybe it's not as daunting, right? So when you take the time to read through the assessment and begin to have conversations, just ease right into it and say, what is it that you've noticed when you're within yourself as you did the assessment? What is it that you think, or why do you think some of the fears might be there? And if all of that seems daunting, to have an external facilitator come assist you with that, I think that will be helpful. Zena, you want to add to this conversation?
No, well, I'll say yes. I think the important piece is really being introspective as a leadership group. I think that is, if there's any message you leave with here today, is taking the time to read through the assessment, as Danielle has said, really think about the implications for your organization, and without getting overwhelmed. It's like, for the 12-step, it's folks in the room, one day at a time. This is not going to happen overnight. What parts of it really do you feel you can have some impact on? What resources do you need to support that? I saw a question pop up real quick around resources. But I think that's part of it. It's, if you don't pause, really take a good look at each phase of what we're outlining and the categories and what the needs are, you won't be able to put resources prioritize the resources. That's where you want to get to, right? And again, I'm using it over and over again, but I think it's so much, when we think about it organizationally, we take this real global look at it. But if you just chunk it down to a real individual level, it's that real step-by-step approach. Instead of trying to conquer everything all at one time. Recovery doesn't work that way, and this won't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Thank you both for that. Annie, I want to give you a chance to wrap up where you were before the internet crashed, and then we do have a couple questions.
Yes, I think I was almost done, but just encouraging people to take this back to your leadership and have your leaders individually complete the survey online where they can rate your organization on the different focus areas, 9 focus areas, excuse me. And make sure they look at the tool, because the survey doesn't include all the meat that's in the tool. But they can complete that individually, and then we'll summarize your results and get that back to you. And then there are organizations that would be willing to be a part of a panel discussion with the 3 of us at NAATP National 2022 in San Diego in May. So now let's see if we can finish up some questions.
I'll jump in with a quick one that kind of ties into what you were just talking about, Annie. And can more than one person in the organization take the survey?
Yep. So like I mentioned, we recommend that it's people in leadership positions, just because they will probably be more familiar with the things that are in the tool. And really, as many people as you want can take the survey. It's anonymous. We won't know exactly who submitted which ratings, and we'll be able to summarize those back to you. And the more people that take it, the more of across the board assessment you'll have. And if you want a survey that will assess your staff, that's something that we can talk about too. We have looked at a lot of those as a committee, and this group in particular, climate surveys from your staff. And that's something that would be another step forward that would be really exciting to take as well. But this one is particularly geared toward leadership.
Great. And then I think I'm going to cue this next one up for you again, Annie, and then Zena and Danielle, if you have something to add. And I'm going to add to the person's question. This is from Lynn Wadsworth. Any recommendations for outside facilitators or organizations? And then my addition to that piece would be a discussion about doing this work internally versus externally. I know that the National Association talked about that and bringing in outside organizations versus trying to do the work internally. And so I think talking about both pieces could be valuable.
Sure, and it really depends on your staff. If you have staff, some organizations have someone who is well-versed and has experience or even a certification in DEI. Others don't have that. And so if you don't have something internal like that, then you can look externally. Danielle mentioned that, as a committee, the DEI committee is really open to talking about this and addressing this. So I want to just put there the link to that site with the committee, because there are some consultants on that committee. And NAATP doesn't endorse particular services, but we are working with some collaboratively, and these individuals can maybe discuss with you who they've used at their organizations, or if they know there's lots of excellent consultants out there. And, of course, the two on this on this webinar have do consultant work, and but there's lots of folks out there that do different kinds of consultant work depending on what you want to accomplish at your organization. So we're happy to have those conversations with you more. And Danielle or Zena, did you have anything to add to that?
I think I would just say is really the assessment is a great place to start, because then you identify, whether you have resources, where your gaps are, where do you need support in. So I think that's why it's so key to start with the assessment tool. Identify where you need support, where you may not have. Some organizations are large. We have organizations that have individual DEI directors. That's their sole role. Some organizations, their HR department kind of is wearing multiple hats. I've seen it done in different ways. And I see really small organizations where there's one champion or two within the organization really kind of makes the impact. But I would just say, I think objectivity is helpful when you have a third party objectivity too. So Danielle, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think you said it best. You both said it best, and yeah, when you connect with us, there are a lot of consultants, Zena and myself included, but there are a lot of consultants that you may want to tap into. So depends on your need, and what exactly you're looking for, that we as a committee are willing to jump right in. As I said, we're willing to walk with you along the way.
National Council too, for mental well-being, they have consultants that are really doing a lot of good work in this area. And you can also look at our affiliate members list. We do have a link there for whether you provide DEI consultation. So that will be more robust over time as we get more DEI consultants in our membership. So thanks, Peter.
We are at time. There are two other questions that I wish that we had time for. I'll pass those on to the panelists today and see if we can get a written response that can go out in that follow-up email. I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to get to those, but we are at the hour. Just real quick as we're wrapping up, you can access the recording of this on our website and other past webinars, NAATP.org. You can also register for future webinars. We did record the session today. We'll be sending out a link to that. A link to the toolkit, a copy of the slides, and confirmation of CE credits next week. Really want to thank Danielle, Zena, Annie for taking time to present today and developing this tool and sharing these resources with all the attendees today. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.